Hey everybody. So today we just want to talk a little bit about the risk assessment category of controls of NIST 800-171. So we only have three controls here. Still important, right? So the first control is we need to periodically assess the risk to organizational operations, including mission, functions, image, or reputation, organizational assets, and individuals resulting from the operation of organizational systems and the associated processing, storage, or transmission of CUI. So we need to be doing some assessment, right? Even once we've set up systems, we need to be looking at our systems and saying, hey, if things go wrong, what could the impact of that be? So, right, a lot of times you'll call it like a PMFEA, like a failure modes effects analysis, right? Similar thing here, right? We just need to basically evaluate, as these systems are working, if things go wrong, what could happen? So, kind of in the test and measurement world, right? If your test stand starts having issues, right, what could the impact be? Well, obviously, right, production is probably stopped or at least impeded. So there's risk there. Are there risks to, people's safety? If someone were to take over the system, obviously there's, financial impact there, but also, right, is there safety impacts? Are they able, with where we're storing data, right? If we, lose that data, what's the impact? And do we have a plan in case of that happening? On our transmission of CUI, right? If we're sending data over like a network or over the internet, are we securing that and assessing the risk there, right? If we've got, a solid encryption, right, like we're using TLS, we're properly storing our keys and our certificates, where they should be, well, the risk is pretty low, right? But yeah, we just need to constantly be evaluating that, even once we've set up systems, right? So when we're setting up a new system, we're probably going through some sort of review to make sure that we're checking all the boxes. But even after that, we need to be doing regular analysis just to say, hey, as these things are working, what risks are out there, and how are these things going to impact our organization, and it specifically mentions, right, including mission, functions, image, or reputation. So, not just in terms of, productivity and keeping, production and manufacturing moving, right? But if you were to leak this data, how can this impact your company's reputation and image to your customers or to the Department of Defense, So, we just need to constantly be aware and looking at, hey, if things go wrong, how bad could this be? And are we doing everything we can to mitigate that risk? Second control, we need to be scanning for vulnerabilities in organizational systems and applications periodically and when new vulnerabilities affecting those systems and applications are identified. So this is largely going to be your IT team's job, right? To be scanning your different software, components, in your IT systems for vulnerabilities. So largely as a LabVIEW developer, you don't need to worry about this too much. I think where things start getting tricky is when you start using a lot of third-party software. So, you're using different maybe programming IDEs for different types of devices. You could have PLCs that use different things, and you're pretty subject to the company that creates those tools to mitigate vulnerabilities, right? And when there are vulnerabilities, you need to basically make a decision, right? Do we stop using that software entirely? Can we upgrade it to like a newer or later version? If we buy a different model of this device, maybe even from the same manufacturer, is there a different software that's more up to date? We need to be just assessing things like that. And, hey, sometimes the answer is, hey, we absolutely just have to use this right now, right? Like the cost to upgrade would be too tremendous to change our entire system. So we just need to check like, hey, well, these are the vulnerabilities. What can we do to mitigate the risk of these vulnerabilities, knowing that they do exist and we're proceeding with them existing, right? So you can do things like ring fencing and different techniques to try to basically isolate the system such that it can operate with those vulnerabilities, but the risk to your entire organization is as small as possible. So like I said, your IT team is going to be pretty much the people out there scanning for vulnerabilities in your systems. But as a kind of test and measurement developer, right? It's going to be up to you sometimes to say, well, hey, we can't not, use this, right? We're bound, right? We have this this VFD, and we can only program it with this special software that we didn't write, someone else wrote, and the communications protocol, so we couldn't even build it, or the communication is proprietary, so we couldn't even build our own if we wanted to, and we can't, at this time, just can't change hardware. So we just have to use this. So then it's up to you guys to kind of come together and figure out how you can mitigate the risk of that vulnerability. And depending on what the vulnerability is, there's different ways you can do that, right? Sometimes vulnerabilities can only be exploited in a very specific circumstance. So you just need to make sure that very specific circumstance is never, there. So yeah, there's different things you can do, and it all will vary, but yeah, we need to just be actively looking for these things, and then when we discover them, basically figuring out what we can do. And this last control, kind of already talking about it, right? But remediate vulnerabilities in accordance with risk assessments. So as we're doing risk assessments, we need to say, what are the risks? If things go wrong, how bad can this be? What could this do to our organization? We need to be looking for vulnerabilities, and with the vulnerabilities that we are aware of and that we have detected, we basically just need to try to mitigate risk as much as possible. So there's a lot of different things out there. One of the biggest things, I think, is creating a demilitarized zone so that your IT infrastructure is separate from your OT infrastructure. Just because OT infrastructure is typically less secure. It has much less resources typically, so it can easily be overwhelmed. And sometimes you have very little control over how you can secure those OT devices. For example, if you buy a PLC, you can't go and install a whole bunch of custom, firewalls and, cryptography tools and whatnot. You're kind of limited to whatever the manufacturer of the PLC has made available to you. So, mitigating risk, a great way to do that is just completely separate your OT devices from your IT devices. Create a demilitarized zone that is basically the go-between between the two. That way, if anything were to gain access to your OT device, it can't directly get access to your entire IT infrastructure on your enterprise network. So, and like I said, right, there's a million different potential vulnerabilities out there. You're going to have to assess each vulnerability and determine, what to do in that specific case, what you can do to mitigate that risk to make sure that it can't impact your organization. So, and that's really what all of cybersecurity comes down to, is just risk assessment, right? This is kind of the foundation of cybersecurity, is looking at what can go wrong, what would the impact of this going wrong be, and what can we do to try to protect against this. So yeah, that would basically be a risk assessment of NIST 800-171. Thanks for watching.
Canon Controls is your gateway to mastering LabVIEW. Dive into programming for data acquisition, industrial communications, and manufacturing automation. Explore how to enhance your projects with cybersecurity best practices. Join the journey to elevate your skills and secure your systems with every episode.